89, AB 2943. Assemblymember Lowe, you are recognized.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me, pardon me. Madam Clerk, please read the item.
Assembly Bill 2943 by Assemblymember Lowe and others, an act relating to unlawful business practices.
Thank you. Assemblymember Lowe, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and members. This is Assembly Bill 2943, which does one thing and one thing only. It codifies existing court decisions and clarifies that California's consumer fraud laws bar the long discredited and harmful practice of conversion therapy, which falsely promises to be able to change one's sexual orientation or gender identity. This bill is express in its terms of limiting the practice of conversion therapy as a commercial service in exchange for monetary compensation. It does not apply to the sale of books or any other kinds of goods. It does not prevent anyone from speaking or writing on the subject of conversion therapy in any forum. With respect, I ask for your vote.
Thank you. Assemblymember Grayson, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, question of the author.
Without objection.
Thank you so much. Mr. Author or Assemblymember Lowe, there's a lot of opinions swirling and a lot of things about this particular bill, especially in something that I am connected to, and that would be the faith community. Your bill, how does that impact the faith community? How does it impact churches, and how would it impact the current practices that they do?
Thank you, Assembly Member. This does not impact with respect to freedom of speech or freedom of religion. This is very narrow in scope under the Consumer Legal Remedies Act, which is that of a financial transaction. So if you are in a church and they still would like to preach whatever the beliefs might be, that is still legal and allowed under the law. But one cannot be advertised with a transaction to make a profit this notion that you can be changed with respect to sexual orientation and sexual identity. So to be very clear, this is very narrow in scope under this Consumer Legal Remedies Act, which is that of a consumer transaction. You can still talk about the beliefs of whatever the freedom of religion might be, and that is still possible. In fact, it is also still possible for within the confines of a church to talk about that they can change you, so long as that there is not a financial transaction.
Thank you. Assemblymember Harper, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and members. With all due respect to the author, I believe that if passed and signed by the governor, that this is a bill that would be overturned indeed by a higher court on the grounds of the First Amendment and regards to the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and the right to freely assemble. I urge my colleagues to vote against this bill.
Thank you. Assemblymember David Chiu.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank the author for introducing this bill. Study after study has shown that conversion therapy is ineffective and damaging. Science and facts show that being LGBTQ is not a disease, a disorder, or an illness. Our LGBTQ Californians should not be subjected to fraudulent practices which could pose critical health risks. And with that, I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you. Assemblymember Eggman, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Rising, I think, as the only licensed clinical practitioner in this House, I will just say that this is a practice that has long been discredited. Nobody goes to a professional therapist to think they're going to get changed from their sexual orientation. This is fraudulent. It should not be occurring. It is damaging to people. And for those who still are worried about their First Amendment rights, you can still try to pray the gay away if you'd like. But it hasn't proved to be effective. And certainly, if you go see a licensed person who is licensed under the state of California to provide psychotherapy treatment, to advertise that you can change somebody's sexual orientation is simply that, fraudulent. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. Assemblymember Chen, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a large faith-based community in my district, and again, some of the concerns that were reiterated were the area of the First Amendment, more specifically in the areas of literature. So, Assemblymember Lowe, if you could answer that question, I'd really appreciate that.
Without objection, would you like to do that now or in your close?
Yes, I have just clarification on what the question was, Assemblymember.
In the area of literature, in the area of books, how does it impact First Amendment rights?
I'll ask you to address that in your closing rather than now. Thank you. Assembly Member Medina, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. AB 2943 would make clear that claiming to be able to change a person's sexual orientation or gender identity in exchange for payment is a fraudulent business practice that misleads consumers and exposes LGBT people to damaging psychological abuse. I firmly believe that LGBT is part of the natural spectrum of human identity. There is nothing wrong or broken with the LGBT community, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. Assemblymember Berman, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. While California has banned conversion therapy as a practice for minors, it is still being practiced on adults, even though contemporary science recognizes that LGBT is part of the natural spectrum of human identity and is not a disease, disorder, or illness. AB 2943 would provide that if a consumer suffers damages as a result of these harmful practices, then the consumer could bring an action to recover those damages. Accordingly, AB 2943 does not touch on freedom of speech or religious freedom because it simply puts conversion therapy on the same level as other fraudulent services. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. Assemblymember Thurman, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I rise in support of AB 2943. This bill simply says that fraudulent activities, no one should be able to profit from them. Conversion therapy is a fraudulent activity that has no scientific basis. I am thinking about young people and also speaking in support of this measure. Many times our young people are misled by things that they hear that they think might be true or might be accurate. And this year I introduced a bill that would help us support LGBT students to help them not be impacted by bullying or impacted by things that might cause harm to them. I think it is important for us to declare that this is a fraudulent activity and that there are penalties for anyone who would profit off of it. And I urge your aye vote for AB 2943.
Thank you. Assemblymember Gallagher, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, members. This is a very difficult issue, I think. And I think the reason why it's a difficult issue is because it goes to the very center of people's identity and who they are and who they believe they are. And so I very much heard my colleague, actually, I was in committee when the bill was up, and definitely heard from him the hurt and the ostracization that many in the LGBT community have felt because of many different things that have happened, and especially as being a young person and struggling with issues of identity. And so I very much hear that, and I see and I know that that's the motivation behind your bill. But I think the thing that I would ask the author to consider, as he's moving forward with his bill, is considering the very genuine and I think legitimate experience of people who testified in that committee, that this was something that helped them and that worked for them. And I believe these people were hearing that testimony, it was very powerful as well. And that freedom, if it means something, it means the ability to be free to be who you are. And I think it must also mean freedom to be who you want to be. And I think for those individuals, who have testified and have come forward as this bill has moved forward, they would probably tell you that this is who they are. And I think we have to consider that experience. It might be different from other people's experience, right? Where it's been very hurtful, it's been something that's been damaging. But for those people, I think we have to consider that living in a free society is the freedom for people to do things that maybe we think are not the best, maybe that we think are hurtful or damaging. So I think that's something we have to think about, the legitimate experience of people who have gone through conversion therapy and have said that this was a good thing for them. The other thing I think we have to consider is potentially the implication for the faith community. And I think maybe this bears a little bit of explanation, is Christians do believe in spiritual transformation. Christians believe that we are all sinners. We all equally fall short of the glory of God. But because of what Christ did on the cross, we've been given a new heart, and we've been given a spirit that transforms us. And so Christians believe that across the board, and they practice that in their faith. Not everybody practices that faith. Nobody's saying that anybody is going to be forced to practice that faith. But they legitimately practice that faith, and there are books, there are conferences, there are areas where there could be a transaction involved, but are legitimate practices of a faith. And let me just say this, we talk about sin. I believe homophobia is a sin. I believe ostracizing a group and maligning a group and slandering a group is a sin. And so, look, as Christians practicing, we are in a struggle against sin. And we believe that is our personally held belief, that God can change us. God, I hope He can change us. I hope He can change us.
Assembly member, I'm going to ask you to please keep your comment to the merits of the bill.
Okay. I'm a work in progress myself. And so let me just say that, I think we should think about the implications, that these could be much broader and go into, the language of the bill. I'd like to work on certainly tightening that to make sure it doesn't infringe upon legitimate practices of our faith. And not just Christian faith, but Muslims, people of many different faiths have beliefs that we in this body may not share, a majority in this body may not share, but do we want to start down a path? I know I have a colleague who says I hate slippery slope arguments, but there's a reason why we've coined the phrase slippery slope arguments, because once you start down a path, other things could come up where people say, isn't this the same justification? We have to be wary of that. And so I would just ask that we would consider the legitimate experiences of people, Californians.
Assembly member, 10 more seconds, please.
And potentially the implications to freedom of religion. And I appreciate the author. I want to continue to have discussions with you, and thank you for listening to that. And I would just ask for that going forward.
Thank you, Assemblymember Patterson. You are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wanted to just further explore the connection between what your bill does and commercialization, particularly with respect to books and tapes and other things that are produced by religious entities who have a point of view that this kind of therapy is legitimate, that they counsel in their churches, they provide commercial transactions, but that's oftentimes within the setting of a non-commercial organization, meaning a book or a tape or the offer of that kind of therapy in the walls of the church would have some kind of a price tag to it to defray costs or to otherwise Could you please address that directly with respect to moving this point of view and this therapy into a class of speech and commentary that is prohibited from being commercially utilized? That question to the author.
I'm going to ask him to address that in his close. Thank you. Assemblymember Marisucci, you are recognized.
Thank you very much. As a former prosecutor with the Attorney General's Consumer Rights Section, and as a prosecutor of the Consumer Legal Remedies Act in particular, I want to make it absolutely clear that the First Amendment does not prohibit banning fraudulent conduct. The faith community, like anyone else, needs to evolve with the times. The science is clear. When you look at the support list, it includes the California Medical Association, the California Psychological Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics. So the claim that the First Amendment can be used as a defense for promoting fraudulent conduct is a fallacious argument.
I see no further debate or discussion. Assemblymember Lowe, would you like to close?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the dialogue and to address some of the specific concerns that were previously addressed. The bill specifically allows for additional therapies which provide acceptance, support, understanding of clients, facilitation of clients' coping, social support, identity exploration and development, including sexual orientation, neutral interventions to prevent or address individual conduct or unsafe sexual practices. In addition, with respect to that of sale of books, this is not defined with respect to practices. Under the bill, this is specifically to sexual orientation change practices, which is that of conversion therapy practices. So the sale of a book is not the actual practice itself. Members, if I might be able to similarly give example with your indulgence, Madam Speaker.
Without objection.
This orange, if I tell you that this orange will help you grow a foot taller by tomorrow if you eat it, and I give this to you, that is legal. You know that it will not help you grow an additional foot. Now, if I told you that this orange would make you grow an additional foot, and I give this to you, and I ask you to pay me 50 cents, that is what this bill does. Makes this a fraudulent practice. But if I give this to you, that is still legal. Members, we earlier this month passed a resolution with respect to recognizing the contributions of the LGBT community. And as I've spoken to many of you, and particularly members across the aisle, in which this does enjoy bipartisan support, you know me. I've had conversations with you. I have conversations with individuals across the aisle and of other faiths. This is a very personal issue to me, in which it recalls back a time, a very dark time, in which growing up with so much hate that I too wanted to find out if I could be changed, if anything could work, because of the societal pressures that we have. And now as we find ourselves here in the state of California, in the state legislature, with an obligation to protect everyone in the state of California, the obligations that we have, that there is nothing wrong with me. There is nothing that needs to be changed. Members of the LGBT community are your brothers, are your sisters, are your parents, are your pastors, are police officers, and everyone in between. We are a family. So this notion that we would accept as a practice, as a legal practice, that conversion therapy works, is antithetical to my very existence in this body. And I can't just tell you how many people are suffering right now in this moment of vulnerability to which they are trying to find themselves and come out in a society that is very hateful to them. In a moment of vulnerability, could I too change? And finding out that they are being charged thousands of dollars being told that they could change with no remedy, and these practices go against the norm. This exacerbates depression and my very own suicidal thoughts growing up too. What this bill does is ensure that we as a state of California recognize and go with what every single medical group has similarly stated, which is that conversion therapy does not work, it is harmful, and it is unnecessary. And so, colleagues, again, as we've had conversations about freedom of speech and freedom of religion, this is not what we were talking about. This is very narrow in scope under a financial transaction. So as we think about this bill before us here today, I hope that you will too demonstrate the courage of your convictions and understanding what this bill does. And demonstrate that members of the LGBT community should be cherished, should be celebrated, and most importantly, we should be loved. I ask for aye vote.
Thank you. With that, Madam Clerk, please open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Madam Clerk, please close the roll and tally the votes. Ayes 50, noes 14. The measure passes.